Okay, so we're going to be starting on Genesis chapter 50 this morning. And as many of you are aware, this has taken us since the last week of December to get to this point. We've been working our way through Genesis since December of last year. But finally, we're here at chapter 50. We're at the last chapter in the book of Genesis, the book of beginnings. And what we're going to see this morning is the conclusion of the story of the patriarchs. This chapter is going to cover two main things. We're going to be looking at the burial of Jacob and the death of Joseph. So, as you guys went over last week, at the end of chapter 49, Jacob died surrounded by his sons in Egypt, which they had fled to escape the famine. That's where we kind of left off. Jacob had died while they were there in Egypt. So picking back up, Genesis chapter 50, verse 1. And Joseph fell upon his father's face and wept upon him and kissed him. Now, this is just another demonstration of Joseph's love for his father. That's been a major theme throughout the entire story that we've seen here with Joseph, that relationship between him and Jacob. So, verse 2. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father, and the physicians embalmed Israel. Israel, Jacob. We went over that several times. Israel and Jacob, the same person. So, Joseph is ordering his father to be embalmed in the manner that they used in Egypt. This was because of his position that he had there as like the second in command to Pharaoh, the prime minister of Egypt. And this just made me think about the fact that this was not the way the Hebrews did things. They didn't embalm their dead. This was strictly Egyptian. And as Christians, a lot of times, if we want to be cremated, we may have people that push back on that and be like, no, you shouldn't be cremated. You need to be buried. You've got to have your body. Think about this whenever that gets brought up. The Hebrews here, we have one of the most important people in the Bible through Jacob and Israel being embalmed, which was against what the Hebrews did. This shows us that we don't have to follow man's traditions. None of that matters as long as we're trying to follow God the best that we can. So they're not following the Hebrew tradition here. They're following the Egyptian tradition in embalming Jacob or Israel. So verse 3. And 40 days were fulfilled for him, for so are fulfilled the days of those which are embalmed. And the Egyptians mourned him for 70 days. That's 70 days that they mourned him. Now again, Israelites, Hebrews, they never embalmed. That's why they explain this here, this timeline. Joseph ordered his father to be embalmed, and that process took 40 days. Okay, so the Egyptians mourned for 70 days. Now that's important because the longest mourning period that they had in Egypt was for a pharaoh, right, for their king. And that would have been 72 days if they were mourning a pharaoh. So that shows how much they honored Joseph. The fact that they were willing to mourn his father almost the same period that they would have mourned for a pharaoh. And we actually have some other passages that show that the normal Hebrew period of mourning was 30 days. So the 40 for embalming and the 30 days of Hebrew mourning is where we get that number of 70. And I've got a couple of examples here we can look at. This is Deuteronomy 34, verse 8. And it says, And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days, showing the Hebrews mourned 30 days. So the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. And then this is Numbers chapter 20, verse 29. And when all the congregation saw that Aaron was dead, they mourned for Aaron 30 days, even all the house of Israel. So again, that 70 days that we see for Jacob is the 40 days of embalming plus this 30-day mourning period for a total of 70 days of mourning. So back in Genesis chapter 50, verse 4. And when the days of his mourning were past, Joseph spake unto the house of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found grace in your eyes, speak, I pray you, in the ears of Pharaoh, saying. So, two things that we need to notice here. It says that after the days of his mourning. The reason that this would have happened after the period of mourning and not during was because the Egyptian tradition was during mourning, you didn't shave. You'd have just let your beard grow out. So you wouldn't have been considered presentable to go and speak to the servants of Pharaoh. So he had to wait till after the mourning period when he cleaned himself up. And notice that it says that he spoke to the house of Pharaoh, not Pharaoh directly. So his contact with his dead father, getting ready, Jacob for his funeral, and then not shaving and all those things, meant that he was ritually unclean. He wouldn't have been allowed in Pharaoh's presence because of being around a dead body. He hadn't shaved, so it has to go through his servants, through messengers. So the message is being passed on by those servants to Pharaoh. So verse 5. My father made me swear, this is Joseph speaking to the messengers, my father made me swear, saying, Lo, I die. In my grave which I have digged for me in the land of Canaan, there shalt thou bury me. Now therefore let me go up, I pray thee, and bury my father, and I will come again. So it says, he says, the grave which I have digged, but the Hebrew verb that's used there, kara, can convey just the idea of preparing a burial place. It doesn't mean that Jacob's saying, I literally went and dug the hole and it's waiting for me. It's kind of like how we'll say, I've purchased a burial plot. I have the place that I should be buried. And we've seen that place multiple times throughout Genesis. It's that cave of Machpelah and Mamre, which we'll see in just a few. So I have a verse here from Chronicles that shows just kind of that it represents having that burial place together. So this is 2 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 14. It says, and they buried him in his own sepulchres, which he had made for himself in the city of David, just preparing the burial place, and laid him in the bed which was filled with sweet odors and divers kinds of spices, prepared by the apothecary's art, and they made a very great burning for him. So just showing preparing a burial place, not literally digging a hole. So Genesis chapter 50, verse 6. And Pharaoh said, go up and bury thy father according as he made thee swear. So Pharaoh is honoring the nature of that oath between Jacob and Joseph. Joseph swore to his father that this is what he'd do, and Pharaoh is saying, I understand that. You can go and take him to Canaan to go ahead and bury him. And that just shows his high regard and respect for both Jacob and Joseph. Verse 7. And Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of the house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt. So over these next few verses, I want us to kind of envision what it's telling us here. You know, we see funerals now, we'll see the cars passing with the headlights on, you know, you pull over, show the respect, and think about how large that normally seems if it's a large family. As we go through these verses, think about how large this procession must have been. We've already seen that it's Joseph taking his father, right? But he's got all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of Pharaoh's house, and the elders of the land of Egypt. So we've already got all these Egyptians that are coming with him. Now look at verse 8. And all the house of Joseph and his brethren and his father's house, only their little ones and their flocks and their herds they left in the land of Goshen. So they're bringing the whole family with them except the little ones. And we saw this when they were originally traveling, probably around chapter 13 or 14. They talk about how little ones and flocks will slow down travel. So that's more than likely why they're leaving them behind there. And then look at verse 9 here. And there went up with them both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great company. So the Bible directly telling us this is a large funeral procession. Tons of people, all of the Hebrews, the family are going, plus all of these Egyptians. And then the chariots and horsemen, it's easy to think about like stagecoaches and wagons and that, but we've probably all seen these in movies and stuff before, right? These are the type of chariots that it's talking about. And these chariots and horsemen are more than likely there for security. And it made me think about how funeral processions today are escorted by policemen, right? We have squad cars that will go with them. They're kind of doing the same thing here with these Egyptian chariots. And Joseph requested permission to bury his father in Canaan in that tomb that he prepared there in the cave. And Pharaoh's granted him permission to do that. And not only granted permission, he sent this whole host with them. And again, that was all of the servants, the elders, the officials, the brothers and their household, the chariots, and the horsemen. So we've got this huge funeral procession, and they're not just going across the town. They're actually leaving Egypt and going all the way back to Canaan. So verse 10. And they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond Jordan, and there they mourned with a great and very sore lamentation, and he made a mourning for his father 7 days. So they get to this place, this threshing floor, and they stop there and mourn for 7 days. Now, a threshing floor, I have a picture over here. This would kind of be what the threshing floor would be set up for. It's actually used for like harvesting wheat. And they actually use, in the bottom there, you can see using a winnowing fan. They would actually take the wheat and the chaff, they toss it up, it's 2 different weights, it separates. And we're actually going to see, we're going to be starting Matthew next week. Christ makes a lot of proverbs using winnowing fans and threshing floors as examples of what he's trying to tell us. So even starting here in Genesis, we start connecting those dots of they stop at this threshing floor. Now, the threshing floor of Atad, that's probably the name of the person that owned it, but we're going to see it get renamed in this next verse. So this is verse 11. And when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning in the floor of Atad, they said, This is a grievous mourning to the Egyptians. Wherefore the name of it was called Abel Mizraim, which is beyond Jordan. So the Canaanites see all of the Egyptians and the Hebrews there mourning, and they say that this has got to be a great man. Look at all of the things that are going on. They've stopped here for 7 days having this mourning. And that name that they changed it to, Abel Mizraim, means the mourning of Egypt. Not like the sun coming up in the morning, but the mourning, the grieving of Egypt. So verse 12. And his sons did unto him according as he commanded them. That means just as he has instructed them. We saw that back in chapter 47 and chapter 49, that Israel and Jacob kept instructing them to take me back to where Abraham bought this cave. I don't want to be buried here in Egypt. And they do exactly what they swore to do for him. So verse 13. For his sons carried him into the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah, which Abraham bought with the field for possession of a burying place of Ephraim the Hittite before Mamre. So we've talked about this place several times through Genesis. Verse 14. And Joseph returned into Egypt, he and his brethren, and all that went up with them to bury his father after he had buried his father. So they go to Canaan, they bury Jacob in the cave, and now they're all returning back to Egypt. And as we're kind of finishing up the funeral procession here, I want us to just think about the fact that this was no ordinary funeral here. It was like a national tribute. It was almost like a national holiday for the Egyptians. I mean, we've seen all of their elders and everything go along with the Hebrews here, so it was a big deal. And this is also probably a spiritual moment for the sons that are the beginning of the 12 tribes of Israel, kind of rededicating themselves back to that covenant that God made with Abraham and then was passed down to Isaac and Jacob. So they kind of rededicate themselves to remembering that promise and what's going to go on there. And we've got to remember that the fulfillment of that promise is something that they had to remain very dedicated to, because they're about to go through centuries of slavery in Egypt. It's not like, well, next year that promise comes to pass. It's going to take a while to get there. And again, we saw Joseph fulfilled Jacob's wishes by burying him in the cave of Machpelah. And we hit on this months ago. Like I said, we've been working through Genesis since last year. So maybe you remember this, maybe you don't. But in that cave, we've buried Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and Leah. So that's Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and Leah. Now, why is that important? Okay, there's a literary device. It's called an acrostic. That means when the first letters of something tell us a message, there's a hidden meaning there. And I understand we're going to say, well, we're missing the E. It tripped me up that we're missing the E too. It's because it's in Hebrew, not English. So don't get mixed up that we're missing an E here. But if you rearrange those, we have Isaac first, I. Sarah, S. Rebekah, R. Abraham, A. And then Leah, L. The acrostic for Israel. Jacob, that they've just taken and buried in this cave. All of the generations before him were leading up to Jacob being buried here. So there's a message that was told from us by the people that were there that this would eventually be the resting place of Israel. And that would be the start of the 12 tribes of Israel, which is the direct lineage that brings us Jesus. So now we've gone through the funeral. They've all returned back to Egypt. They've made that journey back. Joseph has stood by what he promised Pharaoh. Let me go and do this. We'll come back. So verse 15. And when Joseph's brethren saw that their father was dead, they said, Joseph will peradventure hate us, and will certainly requite us all the evil which we did unto him. So once again, they become apprehensive. They're starting to feel guilty again. They're remembering all of their sin, selling Joseph into slavery, and they're like, Dad's gone. He's not here to protect us anymore. Joseph now for sure is going to punish us. And we've got to remember, this is not unreasonable for them to feel this way. He is second in command in Egypt. He's like the prime minister, right? He has not only both the right, he has the power to punish them. He very easily could sentence them to death, and no one's going to bat an eye. He has that power. But verse 16. And they sent a messenger unto Joseph, saying, Thy father did command before he died, saying, Now, before we get into the message, I want us to notice something there. They don't go to their brother. They send a messenger. So already he's brought them into Egypt. He's taken care of them and their family. They just went on this funeral together to bury their dad. And they already are so guilty in their sins that they won't even face him. They send a messenger. So verse 17, they're saying that Jacob gave them this message. They said, Father commanded this before he died. So shall you say unto Joseph, Forgive, I pray thee now, the trespass of thy brethren and their sin. For they did unto thee evil, and now, we pray thee, forgive the trespass of the servants of the God of thy father. And Joseph wept when they spake unto him. So, first and foremost, notice that they don't make this plea to Joseph because of their kinship, their relationship as a brother. They immediately tie it to God. Hey, remember, our dad was a great God-fearing guy. He said, please forgive us for this. But they're probably going to plea it this way because they feel like they forfeited that brotherly relationship because of what they've done. But the most important thing for us here is that there is no evidence that Jacob ever said this. The brothers have made this up. Israel never told the brothers, go tell Joseph I said to forgive you for what you've done. They just don't believe that Joseph has any love for them, that his love was for their dad. So they make up this lie that dad said this right before he died. You just happened to miss it. And when it says that Joseph wept there, he's probably weeping because they're unwilling to even face him. They're sending messengers to him. And he knows that Jacob didn't say this. So his brothers, that he is clearly forgiven, he's brought into Egypt and taken care of them and their family, are still so guilty about something he told them was fine, that it was God's plan, that they're unwilling to face him. They send messengers and send the messengers with a lie saying that their dad said something that he never said. So verse 18. And his brethren also went and fell down before his face, and they said, Behold, we be thy servants. So they only face Joseph after the messenger comes back and says, hey, when I told him this, he started to weep. They had to have reassurance that Joseph still had some attachment before they were willing to go and actually face him. So verse 19, and by the way, let's go back to verse 18 for just a moment. And look there. They fell down before his face. Remember, all of this started them selling him into slavery because he said, hey, I had a dream that y'all all bow down to me. And they sold him into slavery because he said he had that dream. And now this is the fifth time, I believe, that they have bowed down to him. Over and over, they're fulfilling that dream that they wanted to sell him into slavery for. So verse 19. And Joseph said unto them, Fear not, for am I in the place of God? Okay, I want to touch on something with this verse, because at the end of the day, the point kind of remains the same. Because as we read it there, he says, Fear not, I'm not God. Right? That's how we would read that verse. But that's how the Septuagint phrases this. The Syriac and Arabic versions of the Old Testament have it as, Fear not, for I fear God. And remember, we talk all the time about fear can be translated as reverence, as love. I feel like that may actually be a more accurate translation for one reason. We've talked several times about how he was presenting himself as an Egyptian, so he never made reference to their God, to Yahweh. He never mentions their God because he didn't want to blow his disguise as an Egyptian. This is the first time he references the true God. So I feel like that makes sense that he's telling them, don't have fear. Even though I've been in Egypt all these years and I'm second in command here, I still worship the true God. That's how I would take that translation. Not that he's saying, I'm not God. He's just saying, hey, I have not lost my way while being in Egypt. I still love the true God. But either way, whether it's I'm not God or I love God, he's still saying to them, don't worry. I understand that justice belongs to God, not me. So the point remains the same either way. Verse 20. But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. Now, notice there that Joseph does not minimize their wrongdoing. He calls it evil. What you did to me was evil. But he also mentions that God redeemed it for a greater purpose. It was evil, but God redeemed it. And how great of a reflection of Christ is that? We had a perfect person, God in the flesh, come And as humanity, we murdered him. But that murder was the redemption for all of our souls, taking an evil and redeeming it for good. And it wasn't written at this time. This is long before it would have been written. But how much is Joseph's words there echoing this? Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. It doesn't just say that. We know that all good things work together for the good. It says all things. The good, the bad, and the ugly are all part of God's plan. He works all of those things together for our good. Now, several chapters ago, I went through a list, an illustration I'd come across. And studying this week, I came across it again. And I feel that it does a really good job of pointing that out, of showing how God's plan works. So bear with me. I want to go through it again because I feel like it is a great illustration of that. And so think about what we've seen in Joseph's story here, right? If Joseph's brothers never sold him to the Midianites, then Joseph never goes to Egypt. If Joseph never went to Egypt, then he never would have been sold to Potiphar. If he's never sold to Potiphar, then Potiphar's wife would have never falsely accused him of rape. If Potiphar's wife never falsely accused him of rape, then he would never have went to prison. If he's never put into prison, he would have never met the baker and butler of Pharaoh. If he never meets the baker and the butler of Pharaoh, then he never would have interpreted their dreams. And if he never interprets their dreams, he never would have been called on to interpret Pharaoh's dream. And if he never interprets Pharaoh's dreams, he never would have become prime minister, second in Egypt only to Pharaoh, and he never would have wisely prepared for the terrible famine that was to come. If he never prepares Egypt for the famine, then his family back in Canaan would have died in the famine or would have been assimilated into the Canaanites because they wouldn't have had what they needed, right? And if Joseph's family back in Canaan die in that famine, then the Messiah doesn't come forth. And if the Messiah doesn't come forth, that means Jesus never came. And if Jesus Christ never came, then all humanity remains dead in their sins and without hope. So every step of this story that we followed through Genesis has been God's plan, perfectly reflecting Romans 8:28. Every step, the good, the bad, or the ugly, has to happen, and it all will serve our good when we get to the end of things. Now, Genesis chapter 50, verse 21. Now, therefore, fear ye not, I will nourish you and your little ones. And he comforted them, and spake kindly unto them. So when it says he comforted them, he spoke kindly, that means he spoke from his heart to their heart. It's an emotional plea. And Joseph's response here shows us his humility before God and should remind us that justice is God's prerogative, not ours. Justice and vengeance is not for man, it's for God. He is the one that makes that choice. But again, he acknowledges the truth here without sugarcoating it. He tells his brothers, you meant evil. Forgiveness does not rewrite history, okay? But he also explains God meant it for good, to save many. God's plan has a purpose for everything. Even our mistakes are part of the plan, and he has a purpose for it. And the biggest thing that we can take into our lives from that is don't keep going back to God asking for forgiveness for a sin that he has already forgiven. That doesn't show humbleness and humility on our part. That shows a lack of faith. It shows a doubt in God's character. God says, I forgive you once and for all, and it's done. Don't keep asking for forgiveness. You're not being humble. You're doubting God. Whenever he gives us that forgiveness, move forward and leave it behind. Don't keep going back for it. So verse 22. And Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's house, and Joseph lived 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. Remember, this is his son, Ephraim. And he's got 3 generations past that. And it says the children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were brought up upon Joseph's knees. So this is just telling us how long he's lived and that he sees this many generations of his family before he passes. Verse 24. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I die, and God will surely visit you, and bring you out of this land unto the land which he sware to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. So what he's doing here is he's foreshadowing the Exodus. Joseph knew that the promise had been made to the family and that what God has spoken to his ancestors will come to pass. And I've got the verses from back in chapter 15 so we see what he's talking about here. This is Genesis chapter 15, verses 13 and 14. It says, "And he said unto Abram, Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs." This is talking about them being in Egypt, where they're at right now. "And shall serve them." They will be servants and slaves in Egypt. "And they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge. And afterward shall they come out with great substance. Your family will go into slavery in Egypt and come out greater than they were before they went in." And we touched on it. Can't remember if we touched on it on Sunday morning or if it was a Thursday night. But we touched on the numbers. That when they went into Egypt, the family was 70. When they come out of Egypt, it will be over 2 million. That's how much the family will grow while they're there. God doing exactly what he said. I will bring you out greater than you can even imagine. And we actually see here in Hebrews, Joseph's faith in God's plan coming to pass reflected here. This is Hebrews chapter 11, verse 22. "By faith Joseph, when he died, made mention of the departing of the children of Israel." He mentions the Exodus. "And gave commandment concerning his bones." So we've seen the first half of this verse already. He's made mention of the Exodus. We're going to see the second half in a minute, the commandment concerning his bones. And I have a note here that I wanted us to remember. What does it say here? What is this telling us? Joseph had faith in God's plan because he had heard it, right? He'd been told the plan and he had faith in it. Then he tells the generations that he's leaving behind when he's dying so that they've heard it. Well, how do we get our faith, right? Romans chapter 10, verse 17. "So then faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God." That's how they were able to continue the faith, is by continuing to pass it from generation to generation. We are all here this morning because of this promise of God being passed down and for them continuing to have faith in it by hearing it. So Genesis chapter 50, verse 25. "And Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and ye shall carry up my bones from hence." So Joseph's remained in Egypt. He lives to the age of 110. He's had a long, blessed life with a lot of hardship. But he got to see his descendants to the third generation. Right? How much of a blessing is that? He didn't just see his children and his grandchildren. He saw great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren before his death. And he reminds them here that God's going to come and visit us, and he will remove us from Egypt. And then he makes them swear an oath. He says, "You shall carry up my bones from here." So even though he was embalmed, the Egyptian tradition, Joseph was never buried. His coffin remained above ground in Egypt for over 400 years. That was a visible testimony of faith that promise would come to pass, that we will be taken out of Egypt and you're going to take my body with you when you go. And think about if you were an Israelite as a slave in Egypt during that time, but you walk by that coffin once a week, every day, once a month. And you see that visible reminder that Joseph had enough faith that we will be leaving here that we haven't even buried his body. We've kept him above ground, ready to go because we will be leaving. So he left that visible testimony of his faith that they will return to the promised land. And this is a verse from Exodus. This is Exodus chapter 13, verse 19. That shows they do exactly that. "And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had straitly sworn the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones away hence with you." So not only did they promise to do it, they fulfilled the promise. They did what they said they would. When the Exodus finally happens, they take Joseph with them back to the promised land. And we see it reflected here in Joshua as well. This is Joshua chapter 24, verse 32. "And the bones of Joseph, which the children of Israel brought up out of Egypt, buried they in Shechem, in a parcel of ground, which Jacob bought of the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of silver, and it became the inheritance of the children of Joseph." So we talk all the time about multiple witnesses in the Bible. We have it in Exodus and Joshua. They fulfilled this promise and took Joseph when they left. So verse 26. "So Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt." So the use of a coffin was something that was characteristically Egypt. Again, going back to they were kind of intermingling Hebrew and Egyptian traditions the way they handled this. But so this chapter closes Genesis, the book of beginnings, with a beautiful act of grace and remembrance of that promise from God. So after Jacob's death, Joseph's brothers are gripped by that lingering guilt. It comes up again. They still fear that Joseph will finally take revenge for their betrayal that happened decades earlier. And despite Joseph's repeated mercy and provision, they can't move past that memory of what they did. Their hearts are still chained to their sin and selling Joseph into that slavery. But Joseph's response reflects the very heart of Christ. He says, "Don't fear, for I'm not God, and I love the true God. You intended evil against me, but God meant it for good." And Joseph doesn't just forgive. He sees their sin through that lens of divine redemption. What they meant for destruction, God meant for salvation. And Joseph becomes a living example, a foreshadow of Christ himself, who would, again, turn the greatest evil, his death on the cross, into the greatest good, our salvation through his blood. And how often do we follow in the brother's footsteps, living under that shadow of our past, living in that doubt that forgiveness could truly erase what we've done? And we just all need to remember and take into our hearts that Christ's forgiveness is not partial. It's complete. When he forgives us, he forgives every ounce of it. It is all forgiven and gone. And when we accept his mercy, we're not called to remain in fear or guilt. We are called to walk forward in new life. We've got to trust. That's the whole purpose of the baptism. You are burying that old person. You are no longer that sinful person. Leave them in the past. And Genesis here ends with the children of Israel still in Egypt, right? And they're forgiven, but they're not yet free. And the story of the salvation will continue as God leads his people out of this bondage and into that promise and relationship with him. And the same thing applies for us. Our journey as a Christian does not end with forgiveness. When Christ forgives us, that is not the end of our path. We should continue that path in transformation. Just as Israel will walk out of Egypt towards the light of God's promise, we should be moving from guilt to grace, from captivity to freedom, and from the shadow of Satan and sin into the light of God and redemption. So this chapter, Genesis 50, teaches us that divine forgiveness is not just about pardon and forgiveness. It's about purpose. We are forgiven because then we have a purpose to fulfill. We'll see, we're about to start moving into Matthew, into the New Testament. We're going to see one of the last things that Jesus does is he gives us all a mission to spread his word as we move forward. So when we are forgiven, that is not the end of what we should do. And just as Joseph forgave his brothers and looked ahead to God's plan, we need to release our guilt, our embarrassment, whatever we feel about our past sins, and embrace his mercy and walk in his light. The same light that we're going to see shine on Israel, starting with the Exodus, that will lead directly through to our Messiah, as he will deliver them from captivity and us from our sins.